You are listening to the Innovating Cannabis podcast, where you will meet entrepreneurs, cultivators, scientists, doctors, and inventors in the cannabis industry.
I'm your host, Pam Schmiel. In addition to producing and hosting this podcast, I'm also a journalist and freelance writer. You'll find links to my work and contact information in the show notes. Today's guest is Claudio Miranda, a longtime operator in California's cannabis market dating back to the days before Prop 215. He co-founded Guild Extracts, one of the state's pioneering extraction companies, and is now the co-founder of Budist, a consumer rating app often described as the Wine Spectator of cannabis for the depth of education and expertise it provides. Claudio joins me to discuss Budist's recent partnership with MJBiz to launch the first ever bi-coastal cannabis competition. The MJBowl, with winners set to be honored live on stage at MJBizCon this December 4th. Rather than pitting regions against each other, this event is designed as a celebration of excellence in each market. We also dive into Budist's unique scoring and judging methodology for the competition, as well as highlights from the recent Revelry trade show and festival in New York. Let's welcome Claudio Miranda. Let's start with, if you could just give us an overview of Budist and the MJBowl, which you are heading up.
Okay. I'm happy to take it from the top.
Okay.
So I am the co-founder and chief operating officer of Budist. And Budist, for those that aren't familiar, is the industry's first professional ratings and review platform for cannabis products. And we've been somewhat dubbed the Wine Spectator of cannabis, because Budist is filling a very similar role that we see publications and rating platforms like we see in the wine industry, like Wine Spectator, Wine Advocate, Decanter. We see in the wine industry a very robust ecosystem of publications that are in the business of really reading and reviewing the various wines, wine regions, wine producers that are in the market. And that's a very robust ecosystem in connoisseur markets, not only like wine, but with coffee, craft beer, cheese, olive oil. They all follow very similar kind of models using a 100-point rating system. And we felt that cannabis really needed that type of platform for a number of reasons. One, to help really professionalize it and elevate the standards within the industry. And not only just kind of elevate the standards, but standardize as a whole. And what that does is that it creates a little bit of a playing field so that brands and producers can really know, how their products are being evaluated in the market and what is that standard of excellence and that standard of quality. And we're trying to do it in a way that's very kind of transparent and unbiased and as objective as possible, so that things like competitions and ratings and reviews and things of that nature aren't just kind of arbitrary or opaque the way that we've seen historically in the cannabis industry. So for all intents and purposes, that's what Budist is here to do for the industry. And in addition to doing ratings and reviews through a team of 30 critics within the California market, we do competitions with a lot of the same critics, but for every competition, we do bring on other judges as well. And we make sure that whether it's critics or judges, that they really represent the cannabis market in which we're judging or critiquing products. So far, that's been California, but with the MJBowl, it's our foray into the New York market, which is very exciting. And I can transition into that right now then in terms of what the MJBowl is. But basically, it's the first bi-coastal cannabis competition in partnership with MJBiz, who is the company that produces MJBizCon, the largest conference and trade show in the cannabis industry. I'm sure most viewers or readers will be familiar with MJBiz. It's going on its 14th year. It is the largest, again, in the industry. It's kind of like the mecca of the cannabis industry. I've personally been to the last 12. And it's for folks like us, like we all go to various trade shows and conferences in this industry. Most of us go to ones that are more regional in our area. But most people I know, regardless of whether you're from California, New York, or anywhere else within the country or world for that matter, and you're in cannabis, most people make it a point to go out to MJBiz every year. And the interesting thing about the conference is that it's never had a true cannabis competition. It's really just been like a trade show and an expo with kind of the conference kind of components, panels, and things of that nature. But for the longest time, people have asked, why don't you do a cannabis competition, given that MJBizCon singularly kind of holds that national stage, whereas everyone's really regionalized, right? And so really it was the discussion that we started having with the MJBiz folks on partnering with Budist to be able to facilitate exactly that and bringing basically the first national competition. It's starting as bi-coastal between California and New York, and that's just the first step in the inaugural MJBowl, which is currently underway and will culminate at MJBizCon later this year on December 4th. But in subsequent years, we're looking to add more states. And certainly as things go federally legal, we're hoping that then this could truly be a celebration of all products and brands across all legal markets. And we're really looking forward to doing that on that national level.
I mean, a great addition to Budist and, what you're doing. It just seems like really cool. So Budist is a consumer rating platform also, so people can go on there and say, oh, I want this specific product in California, but also you take it to another level where you're educating on that higher connoisseur level. Is that where you get people who sign up to the app, somehow you give them more quality education? Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah. And here again, I like to draw on kind of the wine industry as an analogous kind of industry that we borrowed a lot and were inspired from to a great deal. Because again, if you look at the wine industry, right, if you look at the average consumer that really starts to develop an appreciation for wine, what is their jump off point? How do they start to learn the differences between, let's say that's someone in the Bay Area that goes to Napa Valley for the first time and then discovers Cabernet versus Merlot versus Zinfandel, maybe starts to understand the different white varietals. And then as they develop that initial appreciation for wine, a whole world opens up, because then they realize, oh, then there's Sonoma County, and then there's Santa Barbara County and all the other regions in California. And then from there, it's like, oh, and then there's France, and then there's Germany, and then there's Italy, and then there's all the other countries and Australia and Chile, and it goes on and on and on. So the question is, how did that work in the wine industry? How did consumers, as they started to develop an appreciation on a very kind of novice, kind of amateur level, and how does that graduate to connoisseur level understanding of the various wines, the varietals, the regions, and really start to even dive in deeper, the terroir, the appellations, the vintages, right? And I think, as most of us know, really professional wine connoisseurs or wine critics can smell or taste a glass of wine blind and be able to potentially say that this is a Napa Valley Cabernet from the northern end of Napa, maybe it's Howell Mountain, higher elevation from 1984, and that level of precision understanding that requires a lot of education, a lot of product appreciation. So the question is, how did that get developed in the wine industry, as well as how does that get developed in the craft coffee or craft beer or craft cheese industry? And it's by having educational platforms. It's by having Sherpas or thought leaders, whether they're a critic, a judge, a sommelier, that helps serve as the bridge between the consumer and that producer, and help acts as that kind of a middle ground, or that a sommelier that serves as that information gap right there, that fills that information gap, I should say, by helping consumers kind of grok and understand the complexity of these incredible products. So Budist is first and foremost that, but it is a platform for professional connoisseurs who want to be the Sherpa, the critic, the educator, the sommelier. We give a platform for those industry professionals or a judge. And then they're then helping what we're ultimately in the service of, which is the consumer. They're there to serve as that guide for the consumer, to help the consumer discover this wonderful world of cannabis products and ultimately find the product that's right for them. And on the flip side, it's helping the brand get discovered. It's helping connect the dots between the brand that might make like a craft concentrate that is, from organically grown products, that's regional, that has a local story. They want to connect with the consumer who has those values and that's going to resonate with. And so Budist is ultimately a platform to connect those dots.
Yeah, and what a great state to start in, California or the West Coast, because the way the market's matured, like if you're here, on the East Coast or in these newer states, the consumer's palate hasn't matured to the level that you guys are out in California. So it's the perfect next step to elevating the education that's already out there, but also to your point, I'm sorry, in the newer markets, to start bringing those consumers in and educating them. And it's educating them in where they're buying their product or getting their product. So I think I think we have to attach education to so many parts of where we meet the consumer for that reason, to start the whole education process. Well, but
yeah, no, 100%. And that is the key. And that's really our mission at Budist, is to first and foremost do that, both for the benefit of the consumer and the brand who's trying to reach that consumer and bring great products to the market, right? But one other interesting and important fact about this is that what we've seen, for example, again with the wine industry, is that what this also did as this industry matured, this industry of thought leaders and educators and sommeliers, is that it ushered in premiumization. And what that means in this context is that it helped consumers understand, why would I pay $5 for this Cabernet on the shelf versus $15 versus 50 versus 100 versus 500, right? And you start to understand those qualitative differences between that. And what we've seen, unfortunately, in the current cannabis industry is this kind of race to the bottom price compression, where everything is really valued on the lowest price, the discount, the value. And that's great. There is a world for value brands, but not when that's the driving and the sole kind of narrative. And then also THC inflation. So people walk into a store, it's like, I want the highest THC content at the lowest price. That's been kind of the predominant narrative, which in our view is a symptom of the lack of maturity in the industry. And as our industry matures, thanks to platforms like Budist and many others of us that are in the industry following a similar mission, we're not the only ones, we will help drive premiumization. So we will help the brands that are spending more time and labor and money and a labor of love to craft a higher touch product, fetch a higher dollar for those higher inputs of their craft and their labor and their love. And it requires, again, this education kind of middle piece to help bridge that and help consumers understand this is why you would pay 2-3 times more for this product, because actually a lot more goes into its production. So that's
a rosin versus a distillate.
Exactly. And now we have it upside down, where a lot of, like, for example, sun-grown producers are considered the bottom end of the shelf. Whereas a lot of times, a lot of sun-grown producers that I'm familiar with are some of the folks that are really going out of their way to spend more time and resources and hard work in crafting a very special product, but they're not getting recognized for it. And so a big part of our mission is to give them that recognition they deserve and to help the consumer understand why they should pay more for that, if that's what that consumer wants. Because a different consumer might want a value product. They might want a simple distillate, low-cost product because they might be on a budget, or they might not care about certain nuances, and that's okay too. The point is to foster diversity in the marketplace, not just kind of a very lopsided marketplace that we have today.
Yeah, and I could also see with Budist how it scales in. It's good for the new user because they're just basing it on customer reviews, product reviews. So that's a good intro into learning the basics. And then you start stepping further as you're drawn in to all the education that you're providing in whichever way, you're starting to grow that connoisseur and that education. So that's really cool. I think this is, wow, really fabulous
Yeah.
product. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, we're just getting started.
Yeah, I know. And I love talking to people about the comparisons to the wine industry. And I know like real OGs in this industry definitely make parallels to, or, look at the wine industry, are very interested in that as well. But also a lot of you are out in California where you're just, it's just kind of all meshed together. So it's really two things you're kind of growing up with out there. And then I know a lot of people also look at the hops industry. So anyway, so there's a lot of intertwined things to all these three, like you were saying, craft beer and things like that. So for the Buddhist, what is the difference between like a Buddhist and the Ganjier? Are they both doing the same thing? Are you educating the same way? Or there, when you say I'm a Buddhist or a Ganjier, or are they two different things in, how's that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, one we get asked a lot. So, so the GANJA program, as I'm sure you know, is the industry's first sommelier certification program. So the GANJA, which is part of Green Flower, ultimately it's educational institution, right? They are educating cannabis enthusiasts to level up their knowledge, their expertise, whether it's knowledge of the plant or the service side of the industry, is to really level that up and then to get credentialed in that. So then it's just like if you go to university, you get your degree, and then you're out in the job market and you're like, well, what do I do with this degree? So GANJA is the institution that gives that degree or that certification, and Budist is the platform that then helps you exercise that in the marketplace. So Budist is really a platform. So we have a lot of GANJAs on our platform as far as our professional team of critics and judges, as well as a lot of the consumers. And just real quick, you alluded to this earlier, that Budist is a dual rating system as a platform, that we have the professional, the expert, meaning people who take this as a career path, as a profession, is what we mean by professional in this case, and are trying to use standardized approach to how they're assessing cannabis in this case. And we have those team of professionals, many of which are GANJAs. And then we have consumers who are just people from all walks of life that can equally participate in the platform to rate and review their favorite cannabis products. So like a platform like Rotten Tomatoes, for example, who we modeled that dual rating system after, you have your professional movie critic and then your everyday movie goer. And both perspectives are valid, right? You wanna, and so speaking for myself, when I go to something like Rotten Tomatoes, if I'm really wanting to get insight on a review for, let's say, like an international film or an art film, I might go more to the critic perspective. If I want to get a fair assessment, maybe like a blockbuster film or something, I might go to the consumer perspective, because I can kind of trust one versus the other depending on the type of movie I want insight on. And Bud has kind of developed a similar culture. But going back to your question, so GANJAs basically are, it's one of many ways that one can be certified or that can instantiate their professionalism as a cannabis expert or as a professional cannabis enthusiast, right? There's other ways that you can gain those credentials. Like, for example, some of the members of our team have been judging cannabis competitions for 10, 20, 30 years, right? So if someone has been doing that, let's say for 30 years, which we have those people on our bench, if they've been professionally judging cannabis competitions for 30 years and they've been consuming cannabis for that time, even maybe publishing works like articles and things like that for publications, then people like that don't need a certification, right? They've gained that knowledge and that expertise through experience. And that to us is equally valid, if not even greater in some cases, because they have so much depth of knowledge and experience, right? Other people on the platform could be that they're just seasoned cannabis journalists. They could be educators. You know, a couple of our members of our team have worked for brands for over 10 years, leading up their consumer education department. So really the primary credential is really having a passion and a knowledge and a depth of understanding in the particular category that you're assessing, and then having a drive to professionalize that in the industry. That's the baseline criteria, and GANJAs are a really important segment of that.
Yes, yeah. So as far as partnerships, other partnerships, which I see how you're doing that with GANJA and GANJIER, so I believe I saw that you are also partnering with Best in Grass. Is that something for the MJBowl? or no, or is it too?
No, not with
Oh,
Best
okay.
in Grass. I mean, we are friends with the folks at Best in Grass, and we
Yeah, I saw you say something.
so normally what we do is Budist has judged many competitions. We're most known for judging the California State Fair. We've now done that for the second year in a row. This year was that second year, and that's today currently the largest competition in California and arguably the country. We've also leveraged our platform to power other competitions like the Farmers Cup or the Head Stash Bowl, which is part of Cannabis. So we've done a lot of competitions, but a lot of those competitions have really leaned on our team of professional judges to then be the folks that are assessing the products that are submitted. Other platforms like Best in Grass crowdsource that through consumers, right? They make the products, the brands enter their products, they're available at retail. Consumers then can buy those judging kits, and then the consumers submit that. So in the case of the MJBowl, it's actually going to be a little bit of both. We have our professional team of judges who are going to judge the first wave of contestants, the competitors, and then from there distill down the finalists, and ultimately those group of finalists, after the winners are announced, will be available for sale for consumers to purchase, and then they'll be able to weigh in with their consumer kind of insights and their preferences.
Okay.
So maybe that's where you were getting a little bit of that. And there's groups like Best in Grass and other groups that do more of that consumer judging, which is awesome too. We're very supportive of what those guys do, and they're real trailblazers in their own way.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, let's talk New York competing against California. So
Yes.
so once you get a winner, and I guess in some categories, you're probably going to do the basics, right? I mean, what are the categories you're going to do, I guess?
Yeah, well, for starters, to clarify, so it's not New York against California. It's the best of New York and the best of California. And then the winners in each state will be celebrated on a national stage at MJBizCon on December 4th. So this in some ways is, I mean, I mentioned at the beginning here that MJBizCon is truly the biggest and really one of the only national platforms that can recognize producers on this level. But because of the regulatory framework that we have in America with federal prohibition, everything is siloed to the different local and state jurisdictions, we can't cross state lines in terms of doing a true state-to-state judging competition. So for now, what it is bringing the best in each state. And then what you'll find then is the winners in California across various categories, the winner in New York across various categories will then be announced and celebrated at MJBizCon. Like the best of New York are these and the best of California are those. And it's bringing them together. It's more uniting than it is pitting them against each other and bringing the best of each to share that national stage.
That's nice. That sounds great. It'll be interesting or I'm curious what you think will be interesting to see in the two markets.
Yes.
I mean, there's only so much they can play in as far as their extraction methods and I don't know, maybe strains, like what stands out, maybe terpenes, like terpene profiles or it's going to be interesting to see what stands out in those winning product.
Well, 100%. Well, I think you're pointing to something interesting because it's not just the contestants, right? The brands differ greatly. And a lot of it is a function of how mature those markets are, which I think is some of what you're pointing to, right? That New York is more of a recent market on the legal side of things. It's rapidly developing, but there isn't nearly as many brands, products. That diversity isn't quite there. It's half or less than what we're seeing currently in California because the market fully hasn't matured as much. And by the same token, there's not as many retail outlets. So that market is rapidly developing, but it's a lot less in terms of the types of products. And so it hasn't fully matured, right? It's still somewhat in its infancy. From a regulated market perspective, from a traditional market, it's been very mature for a while, right? But so that's one factor where we will see differences because you're dealing with a much more mature market in California and a less mature market in New York, right? Separate from that, there is a very different culture, right? And this is an important point as well. Is in California we have our team of judges and critics. and they're all California natives, right? Or at least they live in California. Maybe not all of them were born in California, but they're all steeped in California cannabis culture, and they've all been steeped in kind of California culture for a while. Some people, they're like me my whole life. I was born in Hollywood, raised in the LA area. I've been in cannabis culture for 40 years in California. So it's just in my blood, right? And now the point is that in New York, though, we're in the process of building a New York specific judging and team of critics. So why? Because they know the culture and the community there. This isn't about California going to New York and saying, we're going to tell you what we think of your products. Not at all. Budist and like MJBiz is designed to be a national platform. Budist is developing toward that goal. But the idea is to cast a spotlight on each market, let the voice of those markets shine, whether it's the producers, the consumers, the professionals. And we're certainly doing that in our foray into New York. And so we're building a team of judges, all of which are New York natives. There are people who are steeped in that community, steeped in that culture, know the brands, know the strains, know the form factors, and will be able to more directly speak to those when evaluating them, and won't be using an outside standard as part of that evaluation process.
Yeah, you're going to pick up some nuances. Well, I just learned that, New York roll out to be social equity forward, right? To really give it to be a market that really supported social equity applicants, right? So I learned that over 54% of the market, 54% of the market is social equity business owners, from cultivation to retail to brands to manufacturing. And they're all intertwined and best friends because they've been in the illegal market for years and years and years. So you're talking about that culture. It's even more intertwined than I think people realize in the legal market. So, like for instance, there was this flower brand at the Revelry show. He was a sales rep for this flower brand, and he said, I guess he has sold in other markets around the country for this brand he was selling for. And he said, this market is much different to break into and to try to get onto store shelves because of this tight knit community, because they all know each other and they're patting each other and high-fiving at the show, all in any area, because they've been friends and crossing paths in the illegal market for so long. And
100%.
Yeah, and you really see that at this show, specifically this show, because it is a show that has been doing events in this community for many, many years. So so you can really see it. So
well, on the one hand, one can call that like protectionism, right? That they're protecting the interests of their people within their jurisdiction. And look, and we respect that, right? And I go to Missouri, right? I want people from the Missouri in that scene that I want to be weighing in and making sure that their people, their growers, right? That in other words, it isn't a bunch of transplants, people from other jurisdictions coming in, trying to steal their thunder or tell them how to do things, even though that does happen operationally. But that's just one side of it. I think in the case of New York, because there is the social equity side of it, I think that's really important, right? Because I think that progressive kind of move on the part of New York to make sure that all those people that have been disproportionately affected by the war on drugs in those communities, that they have a seat at the table, right? I was, at Revelry. I listened to a few folks, both on the trade floor, but also some of the speakers that were speaking to that. Folks that were coming out of jail after being in jail for many years, and knowing that they're not just coming out of jail to now witness this market that then they just served time for and were financially set back and emotionally and spiritually set back. It'd be bad enough that they went through that, but then had to now sit on the sidelines of a market they helped to create. No, we got to let these people step into that ring and give them a chance to then pick back up where they left off because of missteps by our government and by our law enforcement when it came to things like that. So I think that's really critical. And it makes me happy to see that in New York, they're taking that seriously and making sure that diversity of voices and that representation is really well defined in the market.
Yeah, and it looked pretty shaky there for a while, but I think it's finally really shining and flourishing. So that's kind of really cool to see. But like you said, like tapping into the community for judges, because I mean, but also I really want to say, and I think a lot of people believe this too, outside people outside the state are more than welcome. And I think it's so important for us to have experienced people from the West Coast or anywhere that has perfected this system. I mean, we don't need to be reinventing the wheel here. We want people, I would think, coming from outside states that have that experience. So but I think it's
Yeah,
just,
well, and yeah, well, just
yeah,
one quick note on that is I fully agree. I mean, one thing is like the transfer of knowledge and the
yeah,
teaching and the mentorship. The other is a question of ownership, right? And who ultimately benefits financially and has an opportunity to create generational wealth as a result of that industry. And those two things can live happily together, where you can have kind of equity and ownership while still having people that maybe do have some best practices or skill sets or expertise that they may be able to bring to bear on practitioners that maybe have more of a learning curve ahead of them.
yeah. So anyway, it's still unfolding, but it's it seems pretty good. I'm sure you were there looking at the growers and who might be competing and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Do you have any observation comments about that you would want to talk about here? I don't know if it's something you want to talk about.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to talk about like brands in particular. I mean,
Yeah.
certainly, we were out there for a number of different reasons. My partner Jocelyn and I, Jocelyn Sheltraw, the CEO and co-founder of Budist, I was out there with her, and we were certainly there for various reasons. First and foremost, to be supportive of the industry and the market. Revelry with Lulu and supporting her and her team and everything they're doing. I mean, it's such an incredible a conference, and so there's that, but certainly also to be looking at brands, recruiting, building awareness for the MJBowl was another objective. And my main takeaway from that is, well, one, I was just pleasantly surprised to see how robust and energetic the market was. I mean, the trade floor was wall to wall, shoulder to shoulder. It was buzzing, it was electric, it was exciting. It reminds me of like, the early days of cannabis, whether it's going back to Prop 215 or around the 2018-19 switchover when the legal market really was gaining foot. There was a time in the California market where there was a sense of hope and optimism, and people were really excited for the future of cannabis. And you just saw this wellspring of new operators and brands and the excitement around that groundswell. That's what I witnessed at Revelry this last weekend. And
Yeah.
it was super exciting, especially coming from California, where unfortunately we're feeling like there's a lot of headwinds. The industry feels deflated, the industry feels defeated. So to go from severe headwinds to go into a market that seems to have really strong tailwinds is an
Yeah.
interesting dynamic to experience, just one plane ride away to just, but it's palpable. You can really feel the difference of those wins and the energy that it creates within the community. So that is probably the most significant takeaway that I have from Revelry, was just so happy to see the energy and the vibrancy of the New York market, and how Revelry and their team holds that space and made that space available for all these operators in a very inclusive, dynamic environment. So overall it was incredible. Very happy with what I saw there.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the brands and everything, look, it's, there was some familiar brands, by the way. There are some multi-state operators. There are some brands that I recognize from California, but by and large, it's mostly New York brands. A lot of New York cultivators. I talked to a lot of mom and pop operators and just getting their footing. A lot of them coming out of the hemp market in New York. That was a big part of it. So learning their storyline and their arc
Oh, yeah.
of their adventure. It's different than California. Like, we didn't come out of hemp, right? We
Yeah.
came straight out of, the medical and the illicit, right?
Right.
Whereas in New York, a lot of these folks were first kind of in the hemp market, and they're coming out of that. Not all of them.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was exciting to see the diversity, the number, the quantity of different operators, and it gave me a lot of hope for the New York market.
I know, it was so exciting. And well, what did you think I mean, not to give anything away, but just in general, what did you think of the quality of the weed that you saw? Just like the bags of weed that people had in their booths. I mean,
Yeah,
actually, I know, I guess, I don't know if you can really say much about that, but I
yeah,
guess what I'm asking is comparing, what is the comparison to what you see in California? That's really the question.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
it's not a competition against each other, so we know that's okay.
yes,
But just how do you,
yes.
yeah,
Yeah, look, I mean, it was all over the board, right? Just like how you see in California here, you can see really premium craft, a flower that's been produced by multi-generational farming families, Emerald Triangle and beyond. And, I saw some flower on that level for sure. And then all the way to the other end of the spectrum that you're finding flower that's a little bit more mass produced, a little bit less craft. But you find that here in California as well. So I found a pretty broad spectrum. I mean, I would say that that definitely I would say that, it reminds me, for example, I love to use wine as an example, right? When you go to new wine markets, I was not so long ago up in Oregon and Willamette Valley, that appellation there is, I think, less than 50 years in development, right? You compare that to Napa, which has, 100 plus years. You can go to France where you got like 1,000 plus years, right? So everywhere where you have more legacy and you have more institutionalized and robust markets that have been developed, I think the craft hones in more, right? And so I tend to see a little bit more of that well-developed craft in California. But that being said, my experience in New York on this trip was just a sliver of what's there. I look forward in my next trip to leave the city, go up to Hudson Valley, go out to the Finger Lakes where a lot of these producers exist, see that firsthand, and I'm sure I'm going to find comparable quality in a lot of these regions.
it's so beautiful upstate, lush,
know.
beautiful, and farmland. It's fantastic. And then you're a branding person guy also, and
Mhm.
background, like just as far as like the logos, the look of the packaging and things like that. Um, I felt like there was some repetition in some of the designs. A couple of them almost were hard to identify, separate. But anyway,
Yeah.
just overall, what did you must have been kind of looking at just the packaging.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I felt that a lot of the New York branding and packaging was, look, again, if you look at New York on its time continuum of its like maturity as a market, and then look at where we were in California, like at that time in our maturity, I
Yeah.
think that New York is moving at a faster pace. I think it's moving in a more advanced pace. I think that they have the benefit. If you're a new market today that's coming on the scene, you have a lot more packaging and sophisticated packaging and hardware options than
Yeah.
you did when I was coming into the market 10 plus years ago, right? And so some of it is just a function of the innovation and development in the market on the packaging and devices and form factors and all the other technologies around cultivation, manufacturing, et cetera. So I think a lot of the New York operators are benefiting from that. So I saw a lot of packaging that was very sophisticated, that looked really nice, and some that was basic. But again, compared to like California, like I still see a lot of basic packaging out there. And not that packaging is the most important thing. At the end of the day, it's the contents inside, but it is an important part. At the end of the day, this is CPG, right? This is consumer packaged goods, that if your product is going to be on a retail shelf, that packaging matters a lot and how it differentiates. And I would agree that there was a lot of lack of differentiation in some areas, but overall, I was pleasantly surprised by how nice the branding and the market positioning was for a lot of these brands.
Oh, it's great. And then just one other thing I overheard, I think an extractor saying that there was no, people trying to get in on the green rush and just throwing a vape pen out there and thinking they're going to just slap a brand on. And so I guess there's a couple manufacturers in the area that these white label brands are going for. And so there's a lot of similarities, like, the strains they're using, so it's almost like cookie cutter brands. Everybody, it's like copying,
Yes.
cut and paste.
No, 100%. I'm glad you mentioned that because that is an important kind of point to add to what we just said. I
Yeah.
100% saw that. And that's an interesting difference between the California market. So I've been an operator in the legal California market for almost 12 years now. I was in it for many years, decades prior to that in the illicit market. But one thing is that if you rewind to 10 plus years ago in the California market, there wasn't really contract manufacturing, right? We were all individual brands. Like everybody was their own grower, their own manufacturer. And I'm making generalizations. There was some aggregators, right? There was some cultivation, distribution aggregators and some contract manufacturers, but it's become, that model has developed alongside the development of the market, right? It wasn't something that was prevalent 10 plus years ago. Most of us on the extraction side were extractors making our own product, and we were growing our own flower or sourcing it from friends. And it was very individualized in that regard. The New York market is the opposite. Right out of the gate, you have a lot of large scale contract manufacturers, processors who are processing and white labeling for a lot of different brands. And because the market is growing so rapidly, that's an expedient way to get your products to market. So there's no shame or blame in any of that. If I want to get my brand to market, and I talk to a lot of brands that really were thinking along these lines. They're like, hey, I want to get in on this rapidly developing market. My go-to-market is going to be leaning on a contract manufacturer. I just come up with the packaging and they do everything else for me. Great. But then a lot of them that I talked to said, we're in the process of getting our own cultivation license. We're in the process of getting our own processing facilities. But because of the delays in getting the licensing, setting up, standing up those operations, they're like, let me just start by outsourcing. And then I'm going to come back to doing it in-house once I have that infrastructure or whatever. I've got my licensing, whatever it may be, which again is opposite the way it happened in California, generally speaking.
That's so interesting, because you know who I think just did that? I always get these two confused. Jetty versus Jeter. Jetty is the vape company, right?
Yes.
Okay. So Jetty came into New York, I don't know, maybe a year ago, and they were doing white label, or, partnered with a manufacturer. And now they got their own license.
Yep.
Because I think, they produce high quality, and I don't know if they were unhappy with whoever they were working with, but they wanted more control, like you said, over their whole process to keep it in there. Yeah. So that is a perfect example of somebody that did that just to get into the market, get their brand going that was already
their footing. Yep. As a go-to-market strategy, it's the fastest way. And if you have a go-to-market, then why not?
That's okay. Because I was thinking, that's probably the go-to-market strategy. That's probably what's happening. Really great insight. Okay.
Yeah, well, look, and you got to remember too that from a regulatory perspective, brands kind of have to do that in some ways, right? That if I'm Jetty and I'm a California brand and my operations and headquarters are in California, a lot of brands like that, you're licensing your IP, you're licensing your brand to operators in other markets who can bring that brand to market. But technically, when now I start to own facilities in multiple jurisdictions, you start to get in a little bit more of a complicated legal framework. There's ways to navigate that. But because of the siloed nature of kind of cannabis laws, it's not as straightforward as like any other business where you'd be like, great, I'm going to set up an office or a facility in this other state, and off you go.
Right. I wonder if they have to set up separate LLCs, because Jetty in California, Jetty in New York, because you know how they say you can't be involved with, to be an owner, you can't be involved with other, I don't know, those crazy rules about who your other partner, what your other partnerships are. Every state is different.
That's right. If it all rolls up to the same kind of corporate parent. And then there's things like in jurisdictions going back to the social equity or other rules and regulations where X amount of members on the cap table or in the ownership structure need to be locals. Maybe you need to have a local address. Maybe you need to be someone from that local community. Maybe it has that equity dimension where you're someone that specifically was incarcerated in this jurisdiction of which you're applying for something. So a lot of these folks that are doing multi-state, they're usually partnerships. of how they do that. It's one partner from out of state with ex-partner or partners in state to meet all those requirements.
Which is actually really great. And that I think that it's a great thing in the industry is as long as everybody's a nice person and plays nice, because a lot of these operators are in this whole industry are inexperienced entrepreneurs, and they need someone holding their hand to get them through this if they're going to make it. So anyway, I think that's a great thing. So
Yeah.
So winding down, I'd love to just get your perspective and tips on for someone who would like to compete in the competition.
Yeah.
You know, like what wins? Have you seen in all your years of judging, do you think there's certain characteristics that win? Like, is it always live rosin? Is it always solventless based?
Yep.
Is it terpenes only? Does a distillate product ever win?
Yeah. Okay. No, that's
okay.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of dimensions to that. Some of it's like what we can say objective or standardized, which is what we're trying to do at Budist, is how do you evaluate this independently of opinions or trends, right? But the other dimension of it is trends, and a component of trends is absolutely just the evolution of the market. So let me explain, right? So I've entered on the brand side. I've entered and won numerous cannabis competitions. I've done it through cultivation, but primarily through extraction and hydrocarbon extraction, i.e. BHO, right? When we were leading competitions and leading the pack on BHO, that was the pre-solventless era. Now, I shouldn't say that because traditional hash is solventless. I'm saying solventless as in what really is trendy today in terms of like rosin and other types of solventless products, right? So rosin and related kind of products that you see now that are really trending, they weren't in the market as much as you back then than they are today. Today, it's what the connoisseurs consume. So of course, we didn't see it back when I was competing because the primary products on the extraction side were all the outputs of hydrocarbon innovation, right? Where you had sugar and shatter and butter and, isolates and things of that nature that we produced. And that's what was trending. That's where the majority of the revenue and sales went for purchases in the concentrates category. And that's where a lot of the awards went, were for people who excelled in hydrocarbon extraction. Fast forward to today, and a lot of those awards and a lot of that excitement, a lot of the connoisseurship is around the solventless end of the spectrum. And so that's not to say that like opinions have shifted and people are wishy-washy. That's the way the innovation curve has kind of taken us. And think about like edibles as another example, right? Like 10, 15 plus years ago, I'd be trying edible products. It might be like a brownie or a cookie or a chocolate. The dosing wasn't quite accurate. There certainly wasn't nanotechnology. You didn't see the beverages come on the scene with these incredible emulsion technologies that are used to really create all these award-winning products we see in the edibles and beverages category. That innovation wasn't there 10 plus years ago, right? So one part of it is just the cutting edge of innovation and the trends around the innovation and the consumption of those products. And so you see a lot of the awards going to folks, and there's actual competitions that give out awards on categories like innovation, most innovative product, right? And that isn't just in what I call the software, like the oil or the flower. It could be the hardware, like a vaporizer battery, right? An all-in-one battery, or it could be some really innovative packaging for medicinal products, topical or a tincture, for example. So those things today can and should get recognized for being innovative and bringing to consumers new and interesting ways to consume their cannabis products. So that's kind of one whole side of it. And that's where you tend to see, again, a lot of the awards go to, is people who are on that cutting edge and that's appealing to kind of new consumers and new markets, right? The other side of it, though, is when you have just good old flower, right? Like not a lot has changed, right? There's been different cultivation methods, certainly. I think for now, for example, living soil it's an age-old method, but it's being developed and marketed and refined in a way that you're seeing more popularity around that, and rightfully so. It's an incredible cultivation method. So there are examples like that. But when you go to things like flower, you tend to lean on more traditional frameworks of evaluation. At Budist, we've developed a standardized methodology for how our judges evaluate products. Competitions use different judging frameworks. I've been involved in some competitions where we sit around in a circle, we roll up joints, we taste it, and we're like, that one's better than that one, right? And that's okay, right? Because that's like blink response, right? Like I can taste a glass of wine and I'll tell you 99 out of 100 times which one's better just from a quick sniff and a quick taste. And I have my taste buds and my sensibilities refined with cannabis on a similar level. So there is validity to that gut blink, like this is fire, this is not, right? But that being said, as you get into the nuances of it, and that's what we do at Budist, and we're trying to kind of elevate the industry by implementing a more standardized methodology, we're really breaking it down, and we break it down into 4 main categories: aroma, flavor, appearance, and effect or experience, right? And within each one of those, we're using the 100-point scoring mechanism. And then with each one of those, we're breaking down that 100-point score. It all rolls up to a 100-point kind of score, right? It could be like 95 points. But what we're doing on every one of those, like aroma, right? We're sensing the aroma, and we're breaking down things like the complexity of the aroma, the intensity of the aroma, the uniqueness of the aroma. And we're using the point system as just a way to say, well, why would I give this an 8.2 versus a 9.1, and then how does that roll up to that 100-point score? We've developed a pretty sophisticated rubric for how we go through that deductive analytical approach. And that's to be combined with that gut approach too, right? Like one part of it, so I've been judging a lot of competitions myself, and what I'll normally do is I'll go through a first pass of every product using my blink response, using just my gut and my intuition, and I'll just spit out a score, right? Just the first thing that comes to my mind. And then I'll go through our analytical approach and really go through each one of those nuances. And it varies by category, because if I'm assessing a concentrate, I'm leaning heavily on aroma and flavor. That's what we look for as connoisseurs. We don't think about the effect as much if I'm really looking at connoisseur concentrates, right? It's really the loudness of it and the texture of it. And there's other qualities that I look for more than delineating like the degrees of highs from it, which is important, but not as important. Whereas I swing the pendulum over to something like medicinal products, like a tincture or a capsule, I'm not too worried about the flavor and the aroma of my capsule, right? My capsule doesn't smell. My capsule doesn't have a flavor. There, the majority of the weighting is on the experience. And does it solve the medical use case that maybe it indicates by the producer or on the packaging? If they say this product is for sleep and I'm up all night with the jitters, then that's not an award-winning product. And at the end of the day, our main standard, at least at Budist, and we don't have like the right answer, right? Every judging platform and competition and framework of critique and analysis has different perspectives, and that's all valid as far as I'm concerned. Ours ultimately points to the consumer. If the consumer learns that a Budist judge gave this sleep capsule the gold medal or the first place or the top score, and they try that sleep product and they're up all night with the jitters, then as far as I'm concerned, we did a poor job of recommending a product. And now it does vary, of course, by some people will experience a sleep product differently, but by and large, a product that tells you it's good to sleep should 9 out of 10 times help that person sleep, and they shouldn't be up all night anxious with jitters, right? And so ultimately it has to solve that use case. It has to deliver on its promise. That's another key part of it. And that's particularly true of products that are things like beverages, edibles, medicinal products. So in short, our rubric, our scoring rubric and judging methodology varies by category, but it's standardized. And it's something that then if I add 10 more judges to our judging bench today, they're going to be trained on that same platform. And why is that important? Because then the brand knows that it's not some arbitrary thing. It's not like me and my bros are going to be like, oh, we don't like this guy, or we don't like their growing method, or they're using salt-based kind of cultivation methods. To hell with them, right? It's not arbitrary. It's not biased. It's we're going to apply the same standardized methodology to judging the product, irrespective of where it's coming from. And the last thing I'll say about that, it does often break down by subcategories. You mentioned like distillate a few times. So for example, with the California State Fair, we judge distillate products different from live resin products, different from solventless products. And we would never compare the distillate to the solventless in this case, because they're just very different products, right? So we want to each his own and to shine in their respective subcategory. In the MJBowl, we have a similar subcategorization. And you asked earlier, what are the categories? So there's 5 major categories and 11 subcategories. And the major categories are flower, pre-rolls, vaporizers, concentrates, and edibles. And then the subcategories that typically lie within each of those categories. But that's another layer of it. So there's a lot of intricacy to this. I know I'm kind of like going on.
I guess the last thing is when is the deadline for people to submit product for the MJBowl, and how do they do it?
Yep. So the MJBowl, the window is open till October 3rd. So that's the entry deadline is October 3rd. It's coming up in exactly 3 weeks. Again, it's open to California brands and New York brands across the categories and subcategories that I've mentioned. Go to Budist.com and you'll see a link for MJBowl, Budist.com/MJBowl, to learn more about it. It has the registration form. Every brand must register because we have to verify that they are a licensed brand within its jurisdiction before we can go ahead and accept payment and move forward with that. So we go through that vetting process to make sure that they're legally qualified to enter into the competition. And once that happens, you're in, and we encourage everyone to put their best product forward. And brands that win the competition will not only get celebrated on the national stage at MJBizCon, they'll get tickets to MJBiz, there'll be tickets to the awards show, they'll get a travel voucher to travel to Vegas, and they'll get the press and the national spotlight and a lot of post-social promotion through the Budist platform and through all our partners at MJBiz. So they really get the largest possible spotlight you can get on your brand and your product within the cannabis industry will be shown upon you should you be a winner within your category. And lastly, we have retail partners in every state, in both states. In California, it's the Artistry that has 10 stores throughout California. In New York, it's Gotham that has 4 stores throughout New York. And the winners in those respective states will be sold in a winner's showcase at those partner dispensaries. So this isn't just an award for bragging rights and then the award show's over and it goes into the dust, right? This is something that will actually directly translate into in-store sales and opportunity for participating brands. So we hope everybody enters.